Hey everybody, I'm Brian with Knox Company and I'm going to show you how to grout some tile. We're going to tile this bathroom floor here. It's about 50 square feet. I'm going to show you how to mix the grout, how to prepare the tile for the grout, and then how do we finish it like a pro. So let's get to it. The grout that we're going to be using is a sanded grout. It says it's from 1/8 to 1/2 inch joints. This is sanded grout. It's what you're going to see in most of your tile floors. And you can find this at most of your big box stores. We will need at least 1 or 2 of these sponges. I'd recommend 2 5-gallon buckets. One that we're gonna put some of the grout in. For 50 square feet, I'm gonna do just under half a bag. Could probably go a little bit less, but the last thing you wanna do is not mix enough and have to kind of mess up your time frames by having to mix more. So I would say for 50 square feet, I'm gonna do just under half a bag. One bucket will be for mixing. The other bucket will be for the sponge and the clean water. And this is our tile floor here that we just got done laying. It's been sitting here for about a day or two. As far as preparing the tile, you want to make sure that there is enough room for that grout to go in. Ideally, you would have this whole entire groove, but sometimes we get that thin set as we're putting the tile down and it comes up through. So what we would do in areas like here where it was really high, I just come through with like a straight edge blade and I scrape along the edges of the tile. That loosens it up, and then we come through with a vacuum and we clean out all of our grout joints. And if for some reason we don't do that, I'll show you guys an example of what happens when you go to put your grout in and we have some of that thin set that's sticking up too high. So this right here is a shower floor that I just finished grouting. And while I was cleaning it up, I noticed one spot, you can see right here, a little bit of white coming through. Now it's hard to tell because this is a very, very light gray grout, which is why I used a white thin set. If you're using a light grout, you don't want to use a gray thin set because it will be a lot more obvious when you have something like this happen. But the little bit of white right there, that's actually a peak of the thin set underneath sticking high enough. So when I came through with the grout, it's actually sticking above. So later on, I'll probably scratch this out with my straight edge and I'll just mix a little bit of grout to kind of fill that in, but may not be noticeable. But those little peaks like that can poke up. If you have any of that happening over here in the tile, you come through, especially with a white thin set and a dark grout, you will definitely notice it coming through those tile cracks. And before we get too far into this video, if you want to support me at the channel, you can hit that like button, hit subscribe, or you can even pick up a Fort Knox t-shirt. I have the t-shirt store live. I will link them here in the video. Every shirt has a flag on the sleeve, some cool designs. I have my logo, but I also got some custom designs that I drew myself. I print them myself. I make them and ship them out pretty much next day. They only cost about 20 bucks. That's how I have them listed right now, for $20. So if you want to support me or the channel, that's one way that you can do it. Let's jump back to grouting this tile. So now we're ready to mix. I have one of these mud mixer drills. You can use a hand drill, but I've burned through those things. These are actually called mud mixers. They have a higher torque ratio and they're made to actually turn this kind of mix. So they're a lot more durable when coming to using it all the time. So didn't think I'd use it that much. Glad I invested in this because I burned through one of my really expensive hand drills trying to do this with a regular drill. Little mixing bit, a couple different ones of these you can get at the store. I'll put links for all these different items in the video. Like I said, we have just under half a bag of that grout, and then we're going to add some water. Here in Vegas, it is over 100 degrees, so the hose is really hot. You want to run that water first, get that hot water out of there so we can get some cool water through here. Or if you want to get some water from inside the house, you can do that. But do not add hot water to this because the hot water will definitely change the speed of how this thing cures. It will speed it up very fast. So you want to use cool water. We're going to start with a little bit. Don't want to do too much, doesn't take a lot. We're going to mix it, and we want to get this to a very creamy peanut butter consistency. And it's always easier to obviously add more water. If you end up adding too much water and this thing becomes too soupy and it's really watery, the only way to fix that is by adding a little bit more grout. Then you end up mixing way too much material and wasting it. So I add water as I go, and it kind of depends on where you're at. It's very hot out here, so I might take a little bit more water, but we're gonna add it so we can get that creamy consistency. So now we have this mixed up well. You can see it's kind of got that smooth peanut butter consistency. We are going to let it sit for about 5 minutes after we mix it, come back, mix it for like another 2 minutes, and then we're ready to go. While we have this sitting for those 3 to 5 minutes, fill your bucket with water. your other bucket with water and your sponge. Have that handy because you're going to use that very quickly after we get done grouting. Also, we're going to need one of these grout floats. Again, just a few dollars. I'll put links for it all, but definitely you need one of these because this is what's going to get the job done. So now we've mixed it again. You can see we have that smooth peanut butter consistency. It will stay on here but kind of fall off. We have our water and our sponge, and now here comes the fun part. So we're going to start back here in the corner and work our way out to the door, and then quickly we'll come back with the sponge and start wiping off the excess grout on top. What we're going to do to start, we'll grab some on our float. We're going to apply it down, and we're going to be squeezing it into the joints using the end of it like this. And then we can also come at a 45 or 20-degree angle. Now, depending on how your grout joints run, on the shower, we have a lot of different angles. We can pretty much go any direction. But with these, because they're like a grid pattern, you want to try to ultimately, on your last pass, go diagonal to it so that we can scrape over the top. Like with this joint right here, or this joint right here, we want to avoid going with it, because we'll start to scrape out too much grout. So we want to make sure that we're pressing it into all the joints, using it because it sticks just enough to stay on here. We're going to squeeze it into all these cracks, all these joint grout lines. Pressing it to kind of squeeze it through. And as we're ready to leave this area, I want to kind of go diagonal so I can go across the top using the surface of the tile to kind of keep me level and avoid going the direction of any specific grout line. So I'll come diagonal like this. We're scraping the excess off the top, and we can move on down the way. And we basically just continue that all the way through here. We're going to make our way all the way out, and there's not much more to it. It's a little bit different when you're doing a backsplash and you're working on a vertical wall, but floors and stuff are really easy. Just use your angles, and then on your last pass, you want to try to go diagonal across those grout lines, removing as much of the material as you can, because that will save you some time when we come back with the sponge. So now we have all the grout done. This took me just about 10 to 15 minutes. Now the big secret with doing grout is not to let the oldest part sit for too long. So when you do grout on tile, you want to work in areas that you can do within about a 20-minute time frame. So depending on how fast you can get this done, I would say don't go any further than like half a bucket or half a bag. I know that that will cover about this much space for me. It gives me about 15-20 minutes. I will save 5 minutes to rinse out my bucket really quick, so I can have a clean bucket where I mixed. This stuff will start to set and it will get really hard in your bucket. You're gonna waste a bucket because you're gonna have to come back here and clean this with the sponge, and this is gonna be hardening. So 5 minutes that you would save, rinse your tool, rinse your bucket. Now we're gonna get to where we earn our money, getting this sponge on there to wipe off that first initial layer. You can obviously see we have a really thick haze. We want to get that off before it sits too long. Again, no longer than a 20-minute total time frame. We want to start coming back across this with a very lightly damp sponge. I'll show you how that works. And again, this is where we earn our money. So if you have somebody helping you, which is pretty ideal, you would be grouting and then someone would be behind you doing that first wipe. That will make your life 10 times easier. But if you're doing it by yourself, only work an area that you can handle for about 20 minutes so you can go back and start that sponge process. So let's go ahead and start doing that. We're gonna have our sponge. You wanna wring out most of this water, lightly damp. And then we're just gonna go across the surface very light. We're gonna try to remove this. You're gonna see this pick up all that material. I'm not pushing down too hard, but you see how it's kind of making it really soupy? I can come back with the clean side. And now we start to see the tile. That's what we want to do across this whole thing. Our first pass is going to be probably the most abrasive, where we're actually trying to clean up any of this dry stuff on top, just really by using the pressure of the sponge. And we're going to make it kind of soupy on top. We don't want to push hard enough to get that grout out, but we want to work anything off the surface. And you're pretty much kind of diluting the stuff on top, so we can come back with a clean sponge for the second round and we can wipe that off. So you will be rinsing and repeating and rinsing and repeating with this sponge. Do not come back with too wet of a sponge. The water will affect the grout if it's too wet. So again, just very lightly damp. And then we can come in here and we're just going to be kind of, again, going across. You don't want to go with the grout line. You want to be going diagonal if you can. And we're going to be cleaning off any of the bulky stuff off the surface. We don't want any of the chunks to dry on top of this tile. After this, it's pretty easy. And because I got to this within the 20 minutes, this stuff has not dried too much, but it has already started to kind of grip. But you can see the huge difference between just going over this one time with the sponge. You can even see where I wipe it and it comes off the wall. Because it's still pretty wet, I can actually get a lot of this material off the wall. And so you need to come back within that time frame. It's very critical. So right here, I'll show you just up close what we're doing. This is very extreme because I left a good amount of material on here, but you do not want that to sit for very long. So with the sponge, we're coming over it. Obviously the water, the dampness, start to dilute this. We're trying to get this off of the surface. We're doing that with the sponge. And then we're gonna wipe off any of that built up material. Then you come off with a clean sponge and you would take off that haze. So now we have that first initial scrub. You can tell a pretty good difference here, but we have that haze drying now. There's no chunks of material, but there's just that little haze. So what we're gonna do, we're gonna dump out this dirty water that we just did with that first scrub. Start with a clean bucket of water. And this is probably the most satisfying part, is where we start doing those clean wipes. We're gonna do single passes, one side. That's gonna pick up the haze, and then we're gonna move on. Again, the reason we're gonna do that is because every time we add moisture to that grout, it wants to dilute, and then it's gonna bring up some more of that color dye material. It's gonna create more haze. So we do wanna let the grout start to dry through this process, but we do not want the haze on top to dry. So we're gonna wipe it once, and then rinse and wring it out. This is where it is very important to have clean water and a very, very lightly damp sponge, almost dry, because we're just wiping the surface and we're not trying to add any more water or moisture to the grout itself. So this is where we come through with our wipe. We have clean water, a clean sponge. We're gonna go one side, and then we're gonna move on. You can see we have some of that residue here. This is what we're picking up. And then we're gonna move away from this. Do not overwork that. And again, fresh sponge, you're gonna rinse in between every single 2 swipes. And then we rinse. And now that we have that second pass, we can really see what our tile is gonna look like. You can see there's a couple spots that have a very little bit of haze, but don't worry about that. The main thing is that we're getting all of the thick material off of the top of the tile so it does not dry, and then getting that first thick layer of haze. After doing that pass, you can see we've turned our water back into a hazy, dirty water. That's because we picked up all that fine material that was causing the haze. Now we can let this sit for about 5 or 10 minutes. So the grout really does have some time to set and dry. Then we're gonna come back over it at least one more time with very clean water and a very lightly damp sponge. And we're gonna do the exact same thing. Single passes, one side, and then rinse. That's the way you do it. One pass, one pass. Don't cheat yourself. I would say in total, we're gonna go over this thing maybe 4 times. That last one is really just precautionary. This third pass that we're gonna do is pretty much gonna clean up everything we have. And then if you see any little hazy spots, you can just come back in and spot check it. But let this thing start to sit 10 to 15 minutes in between each pass. It is warm out here, so this stuff is drying pretty quick. So I'm using 10 to 15 minute intervals. You may have to go a little bit longer if it's cold, but just keep an eye on it. The most important thing is after you grout it, do not let that grout material, the thick stuff, the chunky stuff, sit on top of that tile very long. 20-minute areas at max. Do not let that stuff dry on top. You will hate your life. It'll turn that first and second pass of going over with the sponge. It'll triple or quadruple the time it takes because you're gonna be scrubbing it off the top because it's dried so much. So that's the biggest point I can make, is work in an area that you can control with about 20 minutes. And that's pretty much it. It's not too hard. It's something that you can definitely do yourself. In total for this 50 square foot bathroom, it took me less than an hour for the whole entire thing. That includes mixing, first grout, first wipe, second wipe, and then we're going into the third wipe now, which will pretty much be the final time I go over it. Maybe I'll do a 4th pass just for added measure. But in general, you're gonna do 3 to 4 passes with that sponge. And I think that is the thing that people mess up. You can figure out putting the grout in. You can go across the grout lines. You know, don't gouge the grout lines so you're removing too much material. You wanna fill those cracks, but you do not want to let it sit too long between applying the grout and that first pass with that sponge. That wet sponge or that lightly damp sponge for that first pass is so critical. If that material dries on top, you're gonna hate your life. You're gonna feel like you ruined your tile. It's not the end of the world, but you're gonna have to definitely start working fast and scrub that material off the top of the tile. And sometimes when you do that, you end up removing too much grout out of the cracks and you're kind of working against yourself. So stay with that 20-minute time frame. That's the biggest tip I can give you. But in general, it's really cost effective to do this kind of stuff yourself. That bag of grout, 20 bucks. The thin set, 20, 30 bucks. The tile, maybe a couple hundred. And you can tile your whole entire bathroom for just a couple $100s and maybe one weekend. So it's definitely something you can do yourself, and I would highly recommend it. Sweat equity, you can get some good returns when you're doing some remodels or house flips, bathrooms, kitchens. Those are the places where you can kind of make your money back. So it's good to know how to do this. I would invest in your tools, keep your tools clean. They will last you forever if you take care of them. So again, controlling your time is critical. You do not want that thin set or that grout to dry on your tools. Just a quick little rinse, get it wet. Basically all the materials that we're using when we're tiling is very similar to concrete. It's very sensitive to how much water you add. If you let it dry and set, it's gonna be like rock hard. It's gonna be concrete. So you wanna dilute it or rinse it off quickly after you're done using it. That will extend the life of your tools. So that's something else I guess I could recommend, is just take care of your tools, rinse it. You'll get distracted by doing your first pass with the sponge and you didn't just take 2 minutes to kind of soak, spray, or rinse off your materials and your tools real quick. So then you're gonna be going back and buying like another trowel or something. But that's really all I have for you guys. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you found it helpful, please hit the like button. I also make my t-shirts and stuff now. I have my shop set up. I'll link those t-shirts in the video. If you want to support me or the channel, hit like, hit subscribe. You can grab yourself some cool shirts. I make them myself. I ship them out like next day, but they are some cool designs. Everything has the American flag on the sleeve, and it's just something that I like to do on the side. If I'm not busy building homes, I'm making t-shirts, designing, doing all that kind of stuff. So I'll probably make some videos on how to actually start up your own t-shirt business. If anybody's interested, let me know. Any questions, leave them in the comments. I'll get back to you guys, and thank you for watching.